The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Well, hey, Ben.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing just fine. It's a Sundance episode. We're going to talk to some of the award winners, which is very exciting. First up, the creative team from Bad Press. Bad Press is a documentary that I don't want to give it away. We're going to get into it in just a few moments here, but absolutely worth seeing. It does not have distribution at the moment of our recording this, but it did just win a special jury award for the U.S. documentary competition at Sundance, and that's super awesome. Then I'm also going to speak with the director of the Persian version, which is going to come up a little bit later in this episode. And the Persian version won 2 awards at Sundance, including the prestigious Audience Award, which is super exciting.
Very cool, very cool. Before we do that, we're going to do kind of a slightly different closed focus today, correct?
That's right. We've been bad. We have been very bad about our listener mail. We have not been keeping up with telling people on the show all the stuff that we're hearing from our listeners, the Facebook comments, the YouTube comments, the emails. I want to start off with one in particular. Frank in Redondo wrote a very long email.
Here it goes. I haven't heard this one yet. It's not on the Google sheet that we're all looking at, so I'm very excited.
It's not. Okay. So it says, "Hi, Ilya. This is a question for the Cinematography podcast. I'm not a cinematographer, just a film buff, and I'm curious about when a cinematographer is brought on board to a project. It often seems that a DP credit on IMDb is one of the last credits to be updated."
No, I mean, I actually had this happen just last week. I was doing an interview with one of the Sundance filmmakers, and the cinematographer was not listed on IMDb, but production designer, everybody, gaffer, everybody else is there, but not cinematographer. And I'm like, what's wrong with this? And it's not the first time that's happened. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't tell you as to why or how IMDb chooses to update that information, but I do find cinematographers are listed there quite early sometimes on productions where other people are not listed. So I think it's sort of a crapshoot. It's just whatever happens to be the answer. But getting back to Frank's email here, he says he understands that each show is different and the entire industry is freelance, but he would assume that a cinematographer would be one of the earliest and most crucial production jobs to get locked down.
Man, you'd think.
And, it's interesting, though, because we've talked to some people on the show who came in and replaced people or came in super late to projects. So, all kinds of things can happen. It's just one of those things. And then he writes, along the same lines, how does a cinematographer get paid? I'm prying into salary amounts. Is the job a weekly guarantee or a certain number of days with an increased rate if the production runs over? Is it a higher daily rate compared to other crew members? A possible reason why DPs are hired late in the game? And he goes, thanks for your consideration on my musings. And first-time caller, long-time listener. I look forward to every Wednesday, Frank. And I did write a very long, detailed reply to Frank here, which I'm not going to go through and answer in the same detail, but it includes links to local 600.
But the answer is $12.
$12. That's about
flat. That's up. They all get $12.
No. And, there's a huge range. And if you're talking about commercial rates versus feature rates versus television rates versus union and non-union, and ultimately at the end of the day, as a freelancer, if you are fortunate enough to have an agent, it's what your agent can negotiate for you. And same thing, if you're a freelancer without an agent, it's what you can negotiate for yourself. And you have to kind of have an understanding of what going wages are in the industry in order to do that and where you fall on that ladder based on how much experience you have, what kind of credits that you have, what kind of work that you do. So, in a commercial, you could definitely see a DP making $3,000 to $5,000 a day. That's not uncommon. On features, it may not be that high of a day rate, but they might have a lot more days. And things can change radically. Of course, for the longest time, the average freelance camera cameraman with a camera in Los Angeles, the statistic that was bantied around was $50. You wanted someone on Craigslist, $50 a day was the going rate. So it was like yeah, I know. It was really.
I made more than that when I was waiting tables in Orlando in the 90s.
That is absolutely correct, which gives you an understanding of how many people want to do this work in Los Angeles in particular. So anyway, that was the 90s, but I think maybe it's probably better now. Maybe it's gone up to $80 or $100 or something like that. But LA wages for people just starting out in the industry who say, I'm a DP.
Well, yeah. Just starting out. Yeah. I mean, like you got to build a reel and stuff like that. But yeah,
for sure.
I mean, honestly, like when you're just starting out, you're lucky to get paid anything. You're probably going to go do stuff, pro bono or whatever to build that reel and to get the experience and to make the connections. But also, you're not going to be like, freelance DPing Avatar 3.
100%.
You're going to be doing music videos, shorts, student films for like indie stuff.
Exactly. So Ben, let's get to some of the other questions, comments, things that we got here. Do you want to take the next one?
Yeah. So Alex Badu.
This is on YouTube.
It's about our interview with Lena Sandgren from Babylon. And Alex says, I love the cinematography of this film. Felt sleek, yet had a texture to it. The frames feel tangible. Linus is absolutely right when he says shooting on film makes for a more emotional experience. And I very much agree. And I feel like Babylon's kind of gotten the short shrift this Oscar season and in general. I think it's been overlooked because I don't know why it's been overlooked, but I think it's a fine piece of work. And Linus is one of the best working cinematographers today.
Agreed. Yeah.
You want to take the next one?
Sure. Yeah. Also from YouTube, someone commented on our interview with Eric Bronco for Let the Right One In. This comes from Sam Franks. He writes, such a great interview. Again, a pleasure to get such detailed insights into the world of a DP. I would love to hear some tips about how to enter the industry as a cinematographer from established DPs like Eric. Those hero lenses look amazing. I love the idea of characteristic control.
I mean, I think, Sam, if you go back and listen to a lot of our episodes, we frequently, especially the first time we talk to a cinematographer, we talk about how they broke into the industry, and everybody's story is completely different.
It certainly is. And yeah, you will definitely find that with the first time that we talk to people. And I'm pretty sure that I talked to Eric Bronco at length about that in our first interview.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we're on a limited time frame, like we were, for instance, with Bob Richardson for the interview about emancipation. And, I want to hear Bob Richardson's whole story because his work is some of my favorite ever. But almost everyone, I mean, we have some great ones. People like Wally Pfister. I love his starting out story. But a lot of those people also are coming from an earlier time, so they're breaking in through Roger Corman or whatever. But we do have more modern people who've broken in more recently, including the subject of our next question, Larkin Seipel. So Larkin Seipel, who, and we'll get to this much later, but criminally underrated cinematography for Everything Everywhere All at Once. Stolen. Should have been nominated. Wasn't nominated, but I have faith that Larkin's going to be nominated one of these days. So Bill Clay says, awesome episode. Larkin is crazy fun, talented, and really funny too. That stuff about Vernon is priceless. And I got to say,
it is priceless.
I've spent some time in Vernon, the city of Vernon, and it's everything Larkin said it was and more. Larkin's just a brilliant, funny guy. I loved having him on, and I can't wait till he does his next thing and we can have him on again. He's amazing.
Yeah, on that same episode, Carl Cyborg writes, this podcast is so criminally underrated, it's insane.
Well, it is a criminal offense, and I think you should alert your local authorities and have people who aren't rating us higher taken away.
Also, Al Green writes, magic. Going through your back catalog on my daily walk. Just got to episode 15, which I think was about 3 years in.
Oh my God.
Looks like you put production on steroids after that, considering we're up to 178. We're way over 200 actually now. So
yeah. Well, and I know we say it a lot, but that is all the doing of our producer, Alana Cody. Holy crap. Yeah, I'm like afraid to go back and listen to the early episodes.
Yeah.
Have you listened to any of them?
Not lately, because I'm sure that I am terrible. I'm sure that I am not anywhere near as polished as I am today. And we didn't have Ben Katz back then. So
That's true. True. I remember going back and listening to one of the original war stories, which I loved and I had edited. And I was listening to it and I'm like, this is so slow and I could cut 2/3 of this out and it would be a better war story.
Well, I know we have a new batch of war stories that are in the works right now. So.
Oh, sweet, sweet, sweet. So our next piece of listener mail is Don from Twitter. Don 369-33787. Just rolls right off the tongue. Right off the tongue there, Don.
Stole my joke.
He says on Twitter, I really like your podcast. Can you talk more about choice of camera and lenses? I don't think that is covered much. For example, Black Panther uses the Sony Venice. Why? And what were the good, bad points of using it? And I said, that is our standing philosophy, that miring too deep into tech won't age well. That being said, we have an upcoming interview with Maddie Lee Batik that I think you'll enjoy. And I
think
totally
that's true because we talk about that.
We had just, like, when I saw that tweet, we had just interviewed Maddie and we really got into the weeds with lenses. And I think, Maddie is someone who's like very particular about the lenses he uses, and he uses them for reasons. And some DPs are less so, and it's not a value judgment one way or the other. But it was fascinating to hear Maddie kind of talk about his use of lenses and how the storytelling was informed. Well, how he informed the storytelling, rather, with his selection of lenses.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's see what's next up here. It looks like Instagram. We've got Christopher Luigi Moreland Jr. He wrote a lot. He writes, I listen to your podcast on occasion. And first off, I love your podcast and appreciate what you all are doing.
We love you, Christopher.
We do. I'm still learning a lot about this industry, and your podcast has taught me so much. I was listening to your take on Nepo babies, and I wanted to add my take on it. I can't speak for everyone, but when I talk about Nepo babies, I'm not invalidating all the work they have done. Most of them are incredibly talented and had to work very hard to get where they're at. The reason I appreciate the internet poking fun at Nepo babies is because many of them refuse to acknowledge that they are privileged and have had an enormous upper hand. In my opinion, that doesn't invalidate their talent, but just adds context. As someone who doesn't have family in the industry, I find it frustrating when some celebrities like to pretend that they weren't afforded more opportunities than most people. At the end of the day, they are talented and have made art and contribute to society. That is amazing, and they should be celebrated for that achievement. It is just frustrating when they pretend like they are cut from the same cloth as everybody else. That's fair. That's totally fair. I think that there's a lot of people out there who, sure, they might start on third base and they hit a home run. But I think that hopefully most people will acknowledge the privilege and the luck of the draw that they have going in. The ones that
wouldn't
don't.
You say, though, I just want to say, anyone who works in this industry for any period of time is going to leverage anything they have,
of course,
to get ahead, whatever that is. And
of course,
family or a family friend, or they happen to work on a project that gets a little heat, or whatever it is they do. Me personally, my father was Bozo the Clown in Orlando in the early 70s, so I am a Nepo baby. So I really have no ground to stand on, because my father was a local kids show host on a local television affiliate.
Well, you're 100%. And it's not like Obama's daughter who's now getting into Hollywood. It's not like, she's like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to play the president's daughter's card. So no, she's I understand that she's got a production company. It's a whole thing.
A friend of mine who's an editor, when he was an assistant editor, she came to observe him years ago. I think Obama was still in office, and so she's like, putting in the hours, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just feel like everybody who ever succeeded in showbiz got some kind of an angle at some point and exploited it. And if that was their family, or that was, they happened to be the only person at the shop when somebody came by looking for someone to pull focus or whatever, they all got in because of some stupid accident. This industry doesn't want anyone in it, and when you get in, it's an accident 100% of the time. Everyone working in this industry is working here by accident, and we're holding on by our fingernails.
It certainly feels that way for an awful lot of people all the time, including people who have won major awards. I have to share I was in First Entertainment Credit Union, which anyone in Los Angeles who works in the entertainment industry is probably familiar with. It is sort of like the credit union for the freelancers. And this guy just ahead of me in line had his Emmy Award on the counter. And I was like, is that your second form of ID? And the guy turned around and laughed and stuff. We had a little joke about it. He's like, you wouldn't believe how difficult it is to prove that you work in the industry for this credit union. And I was like, I understand exactly how difficult it is, because everyone else here in line had to do the same thing. We just weren't fortunate enough to have an Emmy Award on the counter when we showed up. So
I just had my Cable Ace Award. All right, let's go on to the next piece of listener mail.
It's from Facebook. It's Josh Clutterbuck, who I believe you remember, and we talked to before. I did the last one. Do you want to dive into Josh here? Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll do it. Hey guys, listen to the podcast today and have to say, pretty humbled by your insights and thoughts on my message. You've given me a lot to think about, and I truly appreciate the discussion and honesty you both shared. Even more amazing was that it was featured on the show with Lachlan Milne, who I'm a huge fan of. Thanks again. It's given me some fresh perspectives to think on. Then we have a follow-up.
Yeah, look at that.
In February of 2022, so almost a year ago. Hey guys, I just wanted to reach out again. It's been a year since I last messaged you, and I couldn't thank you enough for the time you put in discussing my situation. Your podcast is still a highlight. After much consideration, I changed my mind about 4 times before realizing life is too short and I needed to change. So here I am, recovering from COVID, and a fortnight out from having quit my job of 12 years and a month away from starting film school. All right. Something that stuck in my head was not having to make your passion your 9 to 5, which really made me consider I should make time for that passion. But the way things was it was never going to happen. I was starving myself creatively, and I needed a change to allow time to explore the options possible. Again, the podcast has been so important for me to remind me of all the wonderful things film and screen provides people in life. Though I know there is a lot of hard work ahead and long unpaid hours, but why be stuck working for an organization you hate just to be comfortable? Thanks again, guys. Well, I would love to hear from Josh what he is up to now. So Josh, if you are hearing the sound of our voice, please let us know if you went through with it, how film school is probably.
Yeah.
Probably still there.
Probably still there.
What school? Get a plug in. We'll plug you on the show.
Okay, and then I think the last bit of listener mail we got here, actually, it's a review on Apple Podcasts. And hey, if you like this podcast, please, review us on Apple Podcasts, review us in some of the places where you can do reviews. It does help our show. It helps us, with sponsors. It helps us with notoriety. It helps us, people judge us on those reviews. So this 5-star review came in on Apple Podcasts from Clark Washington. It says, "Great insights!" ! I'm not in the industry at all. Just a movie dork and love all aspects, especially how movies look. Anyway, always interesting guests and love when they get inside baseball about the creative process, lenses, and the rants. Thanks, guys. That was great. Thanks, Clark. That was a wonderful review.
I don't need encouragement to go into more rants, but yes, thank you.
All right. So let's get to our interview. Let's get to the interview with the creative team from Bad Press.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
I am joined by the creative team from the new movie Bad Press, which is premiering at Sundance 2023. With me is Tyler Grain, the director of photography and producer, Rebecca Landsberry-Baker, who's a co-director and producer, as well as Joe Peeler, who is the co-director and co-editor. Welcome to the Cinematography Podcast. Did I say all your names correctly?
Yeah.
You did.
All right, great. Hey, because most people will not have seen Bad Press, please give the 30-second synopsis of what the movie's all about.
So I am a member of the Muscogee Creek Nation, a fellow citizen. And so our movie focuses on the fight for freedom of the press in my tribe, the Muscogee Creek Nation. So in Indian country, there are only 5 tribes out of 574 that have free press. And so we follow the journalists' fight for free press. The Muscogee Creek Nation, which is based in Oklahoma on the reservation.
It's not just the fight for the free press. You actually delve into a very deep and long-running, ongoing story involving, the political leadership and the battles that go on inside the newspaper, as well as the real incredible constitutional ratification amendment to ratify the free press. How did you decide to get involved in this particular story, and how did this project come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, I am a citizen of the Muscogee Creek Nation. I was born and raised on the reservation, and I'm a former tribal media journalist and tribal media editor. So these are my people. The participants in our film are former colleagues and friends and members of my community that, we've worked with and face these issues that are very, nuanced and specific to journalists who cover Indian country and are covering their own Native communities. And so, having been a part of some of the censorship and faced that, I was just really excited to, not only share the story and their struggle and the challenges that they are facing, but also highlight the humor that's here in our story and among the Muscogee journalists and among the Indigenous communities, more generally. So there's just so much diversity and so much humor in our communities. And so, we have these really important issues that we're dealing with. We're dealing with elections. We're following an election season. So there's all of these things happening that the journalists are trying to keep up with and covering this. And they're also being censored and dealing with transparency and access issues, but doing that in a very funny way and using humor to, cope with the stress of all of these different issues, that we explore in the film. So again, I don't think people always expect there to be humor in, some of these issues that we're covering, but it's a really important element of our film that I'm so excited as a member of the community to highlight.
Yeah, I got to say that you don't shy away from the humor, which is wonderful. It could have so easily been like, oh, this is serious. But, I felt like all the people who are in this, their personalities really come through. And I'm really glad that I think it would have been disingenuous to remove all that, but to leave all that in, I think makes everyone so relatable. And really, you want to hear about the shit stirring asshole. It's like you want to hear, you want to hear all that. And I'm sorry, this is the insider gag from the movie. But I got to say that it's like that is kind of the magic of your project, I would say. Like, I think that there's a parable here that you can say that this story is so timely and absolutely reflects national struggles that are going on in the press and fake news, not only in this country, but in places like Brazil and all over the world right now. And this story, in some ways, is almost a microcosm of the same embattlement that's happening with online news and press. And as you're going through and telling your story, were you constantly feeling the connection to the larger sort of world struggles with the freedom of the press and media right now?
I think definitely, but I think we kind of made a conscious choice early on to let the audience make those connections in the exact way that you're making those connections. Like, we don't ever say the words like Trump presidency or fake news or anything like that in the film, but it was so apparent while we were filming the parallels. It was almost shocking. Because part of the Muscogee Creek Nation election was taking place during the Democratic election on the national level. And so you would get Bloomberg on the national level would enter the race, and then we'd have a person in the Muscogee Creek Nation who has more money than any of the other candidates and seemingly is trying to do the same exact thing. And you just look at it and think, like, we couldn't have written this to parallel so well.
Joe, how did you and Rebecca connect? Have you guys worked together before?
Well, I'm actually friends with Becca's husband and our other producer, Garrett. And Garrett and Becca kind of came to me after the repeal of the Free Press Act and didn't want to see the story swept under the rug, I think. And Becca obviously has the background in journalism and the connections to the community. And I have a career in documentary filmmaking, primarily as an editor. And so we thought if we joined forces, there could be the potential to get this story out to the public and really keep it from being squashed by the tribal government. And they came to me on a Monday, and Wednesday we Skyped with Angel. Angel Ellis is a journalist that we follow at Muscogee Media, who sticks around after the tribal media outlet is effectively decimated by the repeal of the Free Press Act, when they're put under the control of the tribal government to effectively put out propaganda. And we pinged Angel, and I was on a flight by Friday. And I was shooting over the weekend, and it was kind of off to the races, and that kicked off. We're coming up on we're going to be premiering about a month prior to our 4-year anniversary.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, no one ever said documentaries were quick.
Yeah, original plan was to have it out in 2020 to play in the election. So here we are. But yeah, just on to add to that note, I just think, Joe and I make such a great team as directors, and with the connection to the story, of course, I had that, but Joe, I feel like, was able to make it cinematic and beautiful. And of course, with Ty's expertise as the DP, just such a beautiful film that captures a place that's so personal to me and capture my home so beautifully. So I'm very thankful to have the team's expertise behind me.
Well, let's bring Tyler into this conversation too. Tyler Graham is sitting right next to you, and he's the cinematographer for this project. And Tyler, how did you get hooked up with everyone? How did this come to be for you?
Joe likes to say that he shot for the I don't know, how long did you shoot?
I think I shot for like 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, and there was one shoot that was in the middle of the summer in the heat, and he said it just broke him, and he was like, I can't do this anymore. And so they started looking for a DP, and Joe and I had worked together in the past. I shot a bit on his previous film. And also we've made a few music videos together. So I think we have a shorthand already, and it was super easy to collaborate like right away. And then Becca's just like so amazing to work with, and took no time, to get like the team used to each other. So yeah, that's how I got started.
So you're saying you got the gig because of weather. So,
you try tracking an election in the middle of the summer in Oklahoma and sweating your ass off and running down an election with 10 candidates. Yes. I was just like, I'm not built for this. I need some help.
Yeah. Well, I just like knowing Joe, like in his background too, like I think he's the type of director that like just really wants to have his eyes visually on what's happening and stuff. And so I think to be able to do that from a monitor and not be thinking about f-stop and exposure and all these other things, it's just so valuable. And so I think that was like very necessary.
I described this film as a microcosm, sort of the larger world that's out there. But really, this is not a particularly small story, and I felt like there's a lot of concurrent action that's going on. There's a lot of things happening simultaneously. Tyler, how did you decide that you wanted to cover this, or were you always like following one of your main characters, one of the main subjects of the story, or what was your guide to decide what needed to be covered where? How did you really approach this?
Yeah, I mean, the most complicated section was the election for sure.
Clearly, yeah.
Yeah, and that we had to bring on almost all the movie was just one camera, except for that sequence. And we just knew like for this to have tension and like action, and we just knew we had to be in all those places because we didn't know what was going to happen either. So I just think it was like we all knew that we had to do that, and we just scraped together to figure out, okay, we need 2 more operators. And we brought people out, and Joe was one of them, actually. Again,
drafted into service.
Yeah, but I think it like really adds to like the frenetic feel of that scene, and totally worth it. We wanted one camera for most of it because we did want that, like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like cinematic quality to it, and to be able to like add some drama in certain places and really focus on framing and shot selection and camera movement in those places. But like, it's a documentary, so you really have to like let the story guide you too. And so for those moments, it's like, okay, this isn't going to be like perfect, but we are going to get all the coverage we need. And it built the scene the way we wanted to.
There's a bunch of wonderful inserts and close-ups and bits that I feel are peppered throughout the entire movie. How do you go about choosing that, like what could be, I think for some people seem like inconsequential B-roll, but it's never inconsequential in this movie. It always feels like it's adding something to further the explanation of who a subject or is and their character or what's going on. How are you picking that out? Is it, I've heard the reality folks say like, oh, spray and pray, you just shoot it all. But that's clearly not what you guys are doing. It's very, very detailed stuff. And sometimes it's wonderful when you have someone who decides to point out like a particular detail, like an autographed portrait of wrestler Ric Flair. But, other times it's not that. And you guys are picking up these wonderful pieces and bringing them in there. How does that come to be? What's your shot selection for what could be just kind of like the cutaway B-roll? It doesn't ever feel like that in this movie.
Yeah. Well, I think like there was a lot of thought put into exploring the environment to find that interesting shot of the Volkswagen Bug graveyard, and we would be traveling around a huge chunk of the state. And so the one that comes to mind is Angel is kind of giving this monologue, and the trees passing by the car seem to fill the frame and get more and more crazy and become like this kind of expressionistic blur. And that was like hours of driving around shooting. And it wasn't like we were shooting it for a specific story beat. It was just that we were kind of going around and noticing that this was happening, and we would try to catch it as we could. And so we'd get really interested in these little bits of like Oklahoma life and try to go capture those things. But a lot of the time that would be, we'd go and drive out to a location and shoot there for, an hour, 2 hours. And what you see in the film is edited down to, a 5-second shot or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And like speaking to that too, I think like from the beginning, a huge push was to make the viewer feel what it's like to be on Muscogee Creek Nation reservation and feel what it's like to be in Oklahoma in the summer. Really kind of fill the frame with those colors and feelings and like show it how it is. Some of the B-roll that's in there that I think we're super proud of is it's filled with macro shots of newspapers, and we use that as a storytelling device. But we shot all of those practically, like in camera. None of them are graphics, and all the transitions between them are all practical too. And I think it just adds so much texture to the movie. You can just feel it, like when you're so close on a newspaper that you're filling the frame with one word. You can like feel the pulp and the ink, and so glad we did that. It really paid off.
You'll have to forgive my ignorance here because I was unaware of the story before the documentary, but after the codification of a free press in the Muscogee Creek Nation, have there been similar movements that are starting up in other tribes to try to do the same? Is that happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my full-time gig as the executive director of the Native American Journalists Association. So we track the issue of free press in Indian country, and we are definitely seeing, the impact of the Muscogee Creek Nation story on Indian country. And so I know there's at least one other tribe that's pursuing, a constitutional amendment, and that will come before a vote of the people. But yeah, I really hope this sparks a movement and really lays out a blueprint for all of Indian country to say, like, this issue is really important. And it ultimately, free press supports tribal sovereignty because it provides a mechanism for accountability between the citizens and their government. And so we see how important being an engaged and informed voter and citizen is in Indian country. And so, again, very hopeful that this is the beginning of something that will have a really big impact for Indian country. Definitely already seeing the beginnings of that.
That's wonderful, because I think that there's probably is no better weapon to preventing corruption than a free press. And I got to say that corruption happens on every level, everywhere. And having real journalism with a Hippocratic oath to, tell the truth and to do no harm, as you're going through this, and the journalistic eye that you bring to this documentary is very neutral. You're never putting a judgment on, but you have, these wonderful subjects. So your intention is clear. But how does it feel as a filmmaker to, in the moment, be realizing that you are uncovering or revealing corruption, revealing corrupt motivations, you're revealing corrupt policies? How does that feel at the moment when you're getting it and you're like, you're getting it? What is the visceral reaction, I would say, as the filmmaker? How does that feel to exposing corruption?
I would say as a citizen, it was exciting and really rewarding to have our cameras in the room for, these votes happening at the legislative level. I think that because we were there documenting this story, I don't know how, I think that there may have been votes that had turned out differently if we weren't in the room, making sure that people were going to see this and be telling this story. So I can't definitively say that, but I can say, I was very proud as a citizen to have that impact at that level, to be able to document this moment. And I think that we probably had some, influence in that. Again, like, we're providing a layer of transparency that, has never been seen before in the Muscogee Creek Nation. So I like to think that we had maybe some influence on some of those votes. But yeah, you guys.
Yeah, I think it was the way that it felt was surprising a lot of the times, because I think that there's many subjects in the film who are hiding corruption or don't want something to come out. But there are equal, if not more, subjects in the film who are ready to talk about whatever you want to hear about. And we'd be in an interview and someone would say something that was revelatory or explained some backroom vote that we didn't know about. And that was always surprising in the moment, just to see how open the people who aren't hiding anything would be to the camera. So that was really exciting on the ground, I think, kind of understanding it. Also, we make no, I think, as you'll see if viewers watch the movie, I think there was a point in the movie where we thought we were making a mystery. Thought we were going to make a why did the free press get repealed? And we were going to figure it out. And really, that's not the structure of the film at all. It becomes very apparent why it was repealed. And that was because everyone knew, and it was kind of an open secret. And so that was also surprising. We kind of went in with this conception of we're gonna uncover, we're gonna find out all this stuff that's happening behind the scenes. But it was so apparent that the story changed because of it. And so even that was surprising at the beginning of the process.
Tell me about how you put this together from a cinematography and maybe an editing standpoint. This doesn't look like a typical documentary. It definitely has style. That is sort of the battle that every good documentarian is fighting against. They don't want to just I got to capture this, so I'm going to give myself the easiest opportunity possible and just shoot this as wide as possible in case anything happens. I've got it. How are you, you do use a lot of long lenses. Do you ever pull out a second camera for some of this stuff, or are you just willing that, if we miss the shot, we miss the shot? How do you justify that?
Almost all of it was one camera, except for those sequences where we really needed to cover multiple places. But yeah, I think a lot of that is we'll pick up an insert afterwards if we need it. But we want to stay on our main character. She's the star here and this is who we want to stick with, and then find the inserts later. But I think one thing was from my perspective is okay, there's going to be a lot of verite in this movie. It's what makes it great. But you can't really control those scenes necessarily in certain ways. But then finding the places where you can control the look of the film was really important. When we first started, Joe just kind of started talking about all these movies that he was referring to. And we kind of just started talking about them as newspaper movies. Yeah, I feel All the President's Men was one that was always stuck in my head, and kind of I guess just not letting yourself be well, it's just a documentary. We can't look at narrative films for reference. I think that was really important for us to just be no, we can, and we can make those choices. And I feel we really did that in post too. I've been shooting those inserts of B-roll in my garage for 3 years. And we were doing it all the way up until Sundance, finding the right newspaper headlines, the right things we needed for the story. And so that's another moment where I felt we were able to control the look and give it kind of an elevated feel.
Well, mission accomplished. I think that it really comes through, and good job on all of that.
Thanks.
Anyway, is there an official website for the film if people want to find more information or track your progress, or if not a website, social media of some sort?
Not yet, but you can track our social media. We're #BadPressFilm, and that's all over Instagram right now.
All right, fantastic. Well, creative team from Bad Press, thank you so much for being here. This was a lot of fun. I'm really glad that you could spare a few minutes to sit down and talk about the movie, and best of luck at Sundance.
Thank you so much. We're so happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
All right, so that was the creative team of Bad Press, including director Rebecca Landsberry-Baker, co-director and also co-editor Joe Peeler, and then also cinematographer and producer Tyler Graham. Thanks so much for being on the show. Loved the movie, and congratulations on the award. I can't wait to see what happens with this movie and where it goes in the world. I really hope that a lot of people see it.
I'm excited to see it myself.
Okay, up next is Mariam Keshavars, the director of the Persian version, which just won the Audience Award and also a Screenwriting Award at Sundance 2023. And here is the interview.
Here we go.
Mariam Keshavars, welcome to the Cinematography Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You've got a new movie, which just premiered at the Sundance 2023 Film Festival, called The Persian Version. Tell us a little bit about your movie.
The Persian Version is about a young woman, Iranian American named Layla, who returns home to Jersey when her father is having a heart transplant, when her mother and 7 siblings are at the hospital and she's asked to take care of her grandmother, who's here from Iran. She has a very tough relationship with her mother. And through the process of taking care of her grandmother, she finds out that the reason her family came to America was not what she thought. In fact, her parents were escaping scandal. So the story retraces the mother's story through 3 different decades in an effort for the writer-director, Layla, to understand what the scandal is. And through that process, she realizes that maybe she's not as different from her mother than she thinks. And it's a comedy. Most importantly, it's fun. It's about growing up in a very big Iranian-American family in New York, in a brownstone with 1 bathroom and 7 brothers.
So I happen to know from what's been written and said about the movie so far that this is semi-autobiographical, or there's a lot of your own life
more
into
than
this.
Semi, depends how you look at it.
so I guess I want to ask you, was it?
Yes, I own a Burkatini. Is that what you're asking?
Yes,
I did make that by hand.
That was my first question. Was absolutely, if you had a burqa bikini combination, you called it Burkatini. No,
it's offensive, and I did do it.
Well, what I really wanted to get into was the decision to tell a personal family story in this way. Is that scandalous for you? Was it cathartic for you? What's the process like of getting into all of your family's stuff? And granted, it's dressed up. It's not, you're not saying like, hey, this is me per se. But how does drawing on your real life and putting it into a work of fiction, how's that process for you?
I think much of the story is quite true, but obviously we have to have a narrative form. You have to have characters fully fleshed, and it has to be contained within 2 hours. So I think you take artistic liberties also to make it more funny and whatnot. But I think there's so much story when you come from a big family, from any family. So how do you harness that into 2 hours? I think for me, it was really understanding that although these 2 women live amongst a lot of men and a huge family, it really was their story. And it really was a question of even the concept of storytelling. Who has the right to tell stories? And the lead character is a writer-director, and she's narrating and trying to understand the scandal. And at some point, the mother interrupts the story and takes over the story. That was a really big moment for me, because as I was thinking of in the writing process, I started to analyze who my mother was and all of the secrets. And I realized many ways we're reflections of each other. She herself is a writer, but in a different way. She rewrote her destiny coming to America. She had a new narrative. She left behind the old narrative, and she created totally from a new identity. So once I was able to crack that concept in the writing process, I very much knew that it was a story of these 2, actually in some ways 3 women, 3 generations, but it was a story to be told in these ways. And so, everything was in service of their relationship and of trying to understand the narrative through line. But if you really think about it, the story takes place overnight. Even though it goes back and forth through decades, it essentially takes place in a span of 9 months, which was the framing device of the film. So, as a writer, you have to, even if you have so much material, you have to have a very particular framing device for the audience to follow the story. So I went through many drafts, the script, before we ever shot it. And then also, we have to create a cohesion between different eras. And very much the philosophy of the film is that there is not really a differentiation in time between the present and the past in many ways, that they are continuously affecting each other. And so if you notice, there's not any different lensing in what we consider the long flashback sequences. It's not treated in any other way, except for that the production design, obviously the hair and stuff, is different. But it was very important to me that feel continuous in its treatment. There's only a slight shift of colors, very, very small.
There may only be aesthetically some small shifts like that, but you bring up the long extended flashback of the mother, and I definitely felt there was a tonal shift, though.
Yes,
it doesn't feel like necessarily the same movie. You're looking at something that looks like the same movie, but it's almost as if you made 2 or 3 different movies here and kind of amalgamated them all together.
And that's the thing, yeah. Exactly. That's true. The thing is, there's no differentiation in time. So when the daughter is telling the story of the 80s and 90s, it's her narrative arc. And so there's no differentiation in lensing or the way that the story is told. But there's essentially three narrators in the story. It's the mother, the grandmother, and the daughter. So the daughter has one type of storytelling, right? It's like very fast paced, very indicative of her age. She's in her 20s. It's, the grandmother's is over the top. It's like a Western. It's larger than life, like the grandmother. And then the mother's is much more nuanced. It's much more internal. It's much more reflective, much like the character is. So we thought of how we tell the story. They're almost like slightly different genres within the film, because each character, we let the character lead the type of genre, or how we shot it, and even the editing process. So if you notice, like with the daughter, it's much more fast-paced editing. With the grandmother, these like epic shots and slow-mos and guns, and even the music, right? The music is like indicative of a Western. And then the mother's is much more silent. It's much more reflective. It's, very much from the point of view also of the young version of herself, right? The 14-year-old girl in that era. It's more classic in some ways, what we consider maybe classic Iranian cinema even. So it was very intentional that all the storytellers have their own style. It's reflective of who they are.
I can't help but think that the protagonist in this is in some ways got to be very reflective of who you are. And I want to talk a little bit about you then as the filmmaker behind this.
Am I that sarcastic? Do I curse that much? Okay.
You and I only just met. So I
did I throw any bugs in that to make it authentic? They were like, can you make this PG-13? I was like, well, one scene has 4 or 5 fucks. I think that already disqualifies me.
Well, the protagonist refers to herself as being an overeducated and having 2 master's degrees. And I looked at your bio just before the Zoom call, and I was like, oh, look at you. You also have a couple of master's degrees, went to film school. Look, I want to ask you, I don't really feel like it's much of a debate. I also went to film school. I think that film school is a wonderful thing. But there are people these days that seem to be like almost, I want to say proudly, I didn't go to film school. Film school wasn't part of my story.
Hey, I almost got thrown out of film school. Does that count?
I absolutely. But I was just, where do you come down on for the people out there who are maybe starting their career? How important for you was film school? Does film school matter much in your journey as a filmmaker?
I think for me at that particular time, it was important. Again, I would never have gone to. I won a full scholarship to go to NYU, and that was really important. I wouldn't have gone to film school if I was going to go into $300,000 of debt. And that's been my practical mode of existence my entire life. Debt was not a way to survive in this country. But for me, it was just a space because I had transitioned so hard out of academia into something very different. So I use it more as a space of reflection, as a place. Even when they interviewed me, they said, why do you want to go to NYU? I said, well, why should I go to NYU? I don't need to go to school to make films. And they're like, this girl's so obnoxious. We love her. But the reality is, I don't think you need to go to film school. For me in particular, I like that space. I just wanted some time to reflect and to think of who I would be and what was important to me as an artist. And it was also a way for me to go home because I had been living in California. I grew up in New York. It was an opportunity for me to come home to New York and spend some time there for a couple of years. So in that way, it was special. And I got to make a lot of friends, but you don't have to go to film school. I'm often on people call me, they've been accepted. Should they go? Should they not go? And I think it has to fit into a greater idea of what's important to you. I think being in debt is the single worst thing that a filmmaker can do. Like having to pay. I have tons of friends who are so talented, but they have to pay $2,000 a month towards their loans. How can, they can't do the jobs that they want to do. I've been fortunate that I never had loans. And so I never had to, I was able to pursue directing full time. Even during hard times, I didn't have to pay any loans. So I think it's important just to surround yourself around like-minded people. As I've gone around in my career, I've met lots of people through different avenues, through film festivals, through parties, and we've collaborated together. Film school is a place to meet people and collaborate, but you can do that in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be film school. If you're passionate and you want to do something, if you are compelled, because it's such a hard business, if anyone can convince you not to make films, then it's not for you. I think you have to be semi crazy to be a filmmaker because all you get is no's 99% of the time. And my brother's always like, I don't get it. You wrote a script, but no one paid you to write it. Yeah, we're trying to get it financed. I think to them, to regular people, this seems completely insane, but we're compelled to do it. Right. So I always say, If anyone can talk you out of it, it's not for you. But if you're passionate and you feel you have to do it, you'll find a way. And there's so many different ways to get to that place. I think it's also a craft, and I think you have to just keep working at it. It's not like a one-off. It takes a lot of practice to get better.
In that I agree, but you said something I disagree with, which is you have to be semi-crazy. I think you have to be fully crazy. You can't actually just be semi.
You have to have a little bit of sanity to actually do the things that requires, because the reality is, for instance, I teach sometimes at NYU, and I say, you have to be so prepared for that day that it happens, right? You operate on the idea that it will happen. Does that mean just a script? No. It means a lookbook. It means a tone book. It means a book on costumes. These are all things you can do to be so prepared the day that it happens. But also, these are ways to convince people that you know what you're doing and that you've thought of every element of the story. And you could constantly be working towards that. Like for my first film, I think I worked 4 years or maybe 3 years from the time I went to the Sundance Lab to the time that I shot. It took 3 years. But I was always making books, and I was like, pitching the books and the look, even down to the graffiti that would be on the walls. Every element of what you think will be visual and the storytelling that will help a reader translate, particularly if it's your first film. They don't know what kind of chops you have, and to translate the script to the visuals is so important. I think I always tell when I teach, I'm like, the director's book, the lookbook's one of the most important elements, even more than the script, because they won't even read the script unless they see that.
You first came on my radar in 2011, as I think for a lot of people with Circumstance. I was also at Sundance that year. I had a tertiary relationship to a movie called Like Crazy. And yeah, I remember there was a lot of buzz and people talking about Circumstance. Plot your journey for me a little bit here, because I know you then went on to direct for the television series Big Sugar. You made another movie. You worked with Kira Kelly, I saw too, actually, who's a big friend of our show. What circuitous route have you taken to get to this point right now? Because you're back at Sundance. You're back at Sundance
right.
all these years later with an autobiographical movie.
How did I get back here?
Yeah, how is this going? How is this going
back
for
to
you?
Your origins.
Yeah,
it's like so appropriate, because I made my first film, and then I thought, oh, you win Sundance and you get a big distribution deal. Like, that's it. You're done. It's like,
done.
No, not as a woman. Sorry. Ground zero for you. Then I was like getting all this nothing. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna write my own scripts. Then I wrote a script that almost got made, and then that star fell out. And I was like, while I was waiting for that person, I wrote another script, which became Viper Club. So there was another script that I wrote that was financed, that was supposed to happen. And as I was waiting for the actress, I wrote a new script that was supposed to be a lower budget. And then that first one fell apart. And then right away I went into Viper Club. And in between, I sold lots of original scripts to TV to pay the bills. But I think, my last film, I didn't have a lot of control over the film. And it was, I worked with stars. They were amazing, but it wasn't the way I like to work. There was not a sense of family on my set. There wasn't a sense of people being invested, like deeply, emotionally. I felt like my last film was more like a job. I would always be told, oh, this isn't Miriam, this is in film school. Like people would be condescending to me. This is real life. And I was like, no, real life is whatever we make it. This is not the feeling I want on set and not in my post process. So I want to have 100% control. So I was saying to my agent, if I make this film, I only want to make it in a certain way. I want to make it with complete or near complete artistic control. Otherwise I can't do it because it's so personal. And more than anything, when I was, I have a huge cast, like 90 speaking roles, but the main cast was like 20 people. When I was casting, I looked for 2 or 3 things. One was authenticity of experience, like where were you born? What's your life experience? 2, obviously talent and language skills. But 3, your ability to give up the ego and be part of a family. And that's because rehearsal was a big part of my film. We were cast, but on our days off, we would rehearse and rewrite the scripts and make it more fun, like make it feel like a family. And I'm the most proud of people really feeling like this is a family. I see the film and I feel like it's a family. And everyone came here to Sundance. 14 people came to Sundance. We were all staying in a house together, cooking and laughing and dancing. And it was just like the movie. And people came to our party. It's like being in your movie. It's because I wanted to recreate that feeling. When I made Circumstance, I made it with friends and family. The producers in Lebanon, we shot in Lebanon, they put themselves at risk. The Turkish producers in this project put themselves at risk. Films are meaningful from people from our part of the world. They're not just a business. We believe that it can change society. It's reflective of our society. It has it's artistic element to our society. It holds a bigger place maybe in our hearts, in our political views, in our social views. So I just never want to make a film again that was just business, quote unquote. I wanted something special. And so it's perfect that I come back home to Sundance, because I made this film, although much bigger than my first film in scope. The scope is bigger, but the heart is the same. It's really about family on every element of the filmmaking process, from my crew to my cast to my producers, everyone. I really treated it like a family.
You and I must be contemporaries, because I really appreciate the photo that you chose for the Sundance catalog and for your website.
That was 2 bottles of Aquanet.
And I was going to say, I'm going to guess it must be from around 88, 89, right. Something
Very
like that.
Good.
Is that,
you called it out. Exactly.
Well, hey,
my freshman year in high school.
We're both Gen X. So, it's like, I remember those days really, really well. You clearly are not taking yourself too seriously to the point where you're like, you're not going to put that up there. I think it's wonderful that you have.
He's referring to a bit my high school freshman photo where I have ginormously big hair. It's the year I moved to New Jersey, and I tried to fit in by having the biggest possible hair. I would say a full foot in the air, and 2 bottles of hairspray later.
And, I was going to say, I think that the photo that people choose actually as for the director's bio says something about them also as a director. Do you agree? Do you think that that's a good representation of you as also sort of like your professional face forward?
I think so. I think honestly, as many people have said, this is the first film I see that I really feel your humor and your sarcasm and your worldview and your forgiveness. And yeah, I think maybe I'm just at a place where I can't necessarily take myself too seriously. I'm serious, but I think we need to look inside and laugh at ourselves. And I think that's the greatest gift we can give ourselves, is to really take down those barriers and be able to laugh at ourselves. It's kind of a liberating experience.
I think that's a wonderful place to leave it. Miriam, is there a official website or home for the Persian version?
It's marrakeshfilms.com. That's my website, Marakesh Films. And on Instagram, it's the TPV Film, which is the Persian version, the TPV Film on Instagram.
Miriam Kashivar, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. We'll talk again.
I'm looking forward to it. All right, so that was Miriam Keshavars of the Persian version. Thanks so much for being on the show. I can't wait to see what you do next.
Yeah, excited to see the film.
And now, short ends.
All right, so Ben, now that we're through with all of our listener mail and our interviews, it's time for short ends. What is your obsession this week? What are you watching, listening to? What's it about?
Well, when we recorded our host wraps last week, the next day they announced the Academy Awards, and it feels a little bit old newsy to make it our close focus at the beginning, but I feel like I want to talk about the Oscar nominations for Best Cinematography. But before I do, I want to ask you a trivia question.
Ooh, I'm ready.
Who is the first recipient of the Best Cinematography Oscar from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences ever? I'll even tell you what year it was.
Oh my God. Okay, what year was it?
1928.
Oh my God. Let's see.
I wouldn't have answered this either. I bet nobody who's ever been on the show could answer this.
1928.
First Best Cinematography recipient.
I feel like it's something I should know.
We should all know
something.
This is something both of us should know, and I didn't know it.
I don't know.
Well, it's not a name that I would have known either. It's Charles Rocher.
Oh.
And
okay.
He won the very first Best Cinematography Oscar for a movie called Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans.
Oh, Sunrise. Of course. I should know that. I know Sunrise. Sunrise is incredible. So absolutely amazing movie. Yeah, Charles Rocher, of course.
And Charles Rocher, by the way, not around anymore, obviously.
No.
But he didn't die that long ago. He died in 1974. So he made it to the ripe old age of 88. And he shot, if you look him up, he shot tons of stuff. He won or was nominated for several Oscars. Some of them are ones that you would have heard of. He won Best Cinematography in 1935 for a movie called The Affairs of Cellini. He got a nomination in 1945 for a film called Kismet. His last nomination was 1952 for Showboat. So,
all right.
he also shot Annie Get Your Gun. He shot The Yearling.
Ziegfeld Follies. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing career. Yeah, if you look him up, he's got an amazing career. So I figured I would stuff that education down our throats and then get to who the nominees were.
And I'm just gonna chime in here. If you've never seen Sunrise, absolutely worth seeing. Beautiful, beautiful movie.
But you can't call the cinematographer on the phone. He hasn't been answering since 1974.
No, he did it looks like Moulin Rouge in 1934, a version of the movie I've never seen. So
wow. So the nominations for Best Cinematography came in, again, as I said, last week, a day after we recorded our host wraps. And I'm always interested to see who we've interviewed, because obviously we've been scrambling to interview the people who were likely to be nominated. And I will die on the hill of Larkin Seipel should have been nominated, and he's not. But you can't really argue with the people who were nominated. So it is All Quiet on the Western Front, James Friend.
That makes sense, yeah.
Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths. Darius Kanji. I mean,
he's good.
That guy might have a future. Darius Kanji is definitely on our white whale list of people we would love to talk to. We love his work. Elvis, shot by Mandy Walker, who we've spoken to, but actually we spoke to her before she got shut down by COVID. Elvis was one of the movies that got shut down because Tom Hanks got COVID, but we didn't actually talk about Elvis because I don't believe we've spoken to her since Elvis came out. We were talking to her about Mulan, but Mandy's awesome. Empire of Light, Roger Deakins, unlikely we're going to talk to him. And and Tar, Florian Hofmeister, who you talked to.
Yeah, I sure did. Yeah, it was a great interview. Really liked it, and I wish him all the best. I hope it goes well.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the ones that didn't get nominated. I thoroughly expected the Batman to get a nomination. If I had come up with my list of who was going to get nominated, this maybe wouldn't have been the list, but you can't argue with it. All of these movies are they're the cutting edge of visual storytelling. So, I do think some people were robbed, but, so I don't know if there's that much more to say about it. We're going to have our Oscar roundup, hopefully with our friend Janelle Riley from Variety Magazine, but just keep all those in your head. So Ilya, what is your pet obsession of the week?
Well, it's The Last of Us. I know I talked about it when it was teased, but The Last of Us, the HBO Max series, I'm really enjoying. And I never played the video game. I don't know anything about the game, but I gotta say, it's Craig Mazin. We've talked about it. I know a couple of times on the show, and it's really good. It's really good. And I understand from people who have played the game they were like, wow, there is some stuff in here that feels like it's right out of it.
Yeah.
And there's some creative liberties for, of course, people that you can't just make a version of the video game and call it a day, but it works really well. And it kind of, look, they do some interesting stuff early on and not really giving much away, but there's a couple of main characters who they kill off immediately in the story. And man, it's like, these are we get spend time and invest time in them, and then they're just gone. I always feel like that's a really gutsy move of a television series to, kill off someone who they've spent serious time with the audience building the character, making sure that they have really, solid development, and then they're gone. It was great to see Anna Torv in the show, who I loved from Fringe back in the day, and she's almost unrecognizable. Doesn't look like herself at all. Pedro Pascal is, of course, great. And man, even Nick Offerman. Yeah, Nick Offerman is in this, and he's spectacular. So look, it's if you haven't tried it yet, The Last of Us, HBO Max, highly recommended, worth a watch.
Can I tell you, I was a friend of mine named Reese, who is a huge fan of the game, has been telling me how awesome it is. And I watched the first episode, and I'm like, I mean, it's good, but it just kind of reminds me of 28
You thought it needed a werewolf.
28. No, I didn't think it needed a werewolf. I just feel like it was 28 Days Later, The Walking Dead, Dawn of the Dead, The Road. Like I could think of 100 things that felt like that. And so I watched that. I watched the second episode, and I was like, kind of same thing. And then I watched the third episode with Nick Offerman in it, and that episode is just mind blowing. It's such a great episode of television, so well done, and kind of shows you the narrative lengths that this show is willing to go, just kind of in terms of the depth of the storytelling. It's Craig Mazin really is pretty amazing. I was never a giant fan of his movies. I've loved his podcast for probably a decade now. Script Notes, I listen to it every week. But when he got into television and he did Chernobyl, you just realize what a great writer he is.
I got to say, I thought of Chernobyl multiple times watching this. So, I mean, it's not even stylistically, that similar, but I was reminded just because, it's quality television, the same way that Chernobyl was quality television. I feel like this is quality television.
100%. All right. Well, I think that about wraps us up for the night. Who do we need to thank?
Let's start off by thanking Ben Katz.
Oh my God, Ben, I'm so sorry. I want to start by apologizing to Ben Katz. Oh dear Lord,
we
Ben.
probably should have rehearsed this episode before.
We should
recording it. I would not have thought that viewer mail needed rehearsal, but we probably should have rehearsed that.
Larry Fong had those stickers made that said, if you're going to shoot the rehearsal, then it's not a rehearsal.
It's not a rehearsal. Yeah. I thought about mentioning Larry Fong earlier too, because he had a nice origin story in his episode. But anyway, regardless, let's thank Alana Cody. Alana kicking the butt, building the show, putting it together. She's launched her own company called Green Tree Creative. And if you like what she does for us, you have the possibility of hiring her as well. She's got putting it all together.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, it's like, you and me yakking like a couple of morons is one thing, but like, all the behind the scenes stuff that Alana coordinates and understanding kind of the back end of how this stuff is put together, how it is marketed, how it reaches its audience. Like that's the stuff that honestly, I don't really know anything about. And she's made a humongous difference for this show.
Yeah, her website is called growwithgreentree.com, and you can reach out to her and she can, I'm sure, help you with whatever you're doing. It is way more complex than you might think. And if you wonder why there's so many podcasts out there that never get heard and why there's so many podcasts out there that have such poor production value, it's because they probably don't have an Alana. They probably don't have producers. They are trying to do everything themselves. And so yes, Alana Cody, growwithgreentree.com. You can reach out to her and she can, help you with your podcast. And Ben, we should definitely thank Kay Zalatracci,
of course,
who posted something very nice or tagged me on something very nice on Facebook. He comparing me to some very prolific YouTuber who has done tons and tons of cool stuff and has a very good channel, and basically equated his relationship with me to, he's going through withdrawals and he watches this guy when he needs to get some tech information or something. And I got to say that it was very kind because he compared me to someone who was really, really professional, and I really appreciate that. Thank you, Kay. It was very, very.
The illusion is complete.
All right. So Ben, where can people find you if they want to track you down?
Please go to benrock.com and you'll find all the information you need to find me right there, including all my social medias and LinkedIn's and Twitters and whatnot. How about yourself, Ilya? Where can people find you?
You can track me down over at Hot Red Cameras. HotRedCameras.com is the web store. You can also find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn seems to be a way that people are finding me these days. So there's only a couple Ilya Friedmans. You'll find me real quick if you search for me.
All right. So Ilya, why don't you take us out now?
Thanks for listening.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.